Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're going to tackle a topic that still gets a lot of discussion, right? The reasons behind Donald Trump's win back in 2016.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're basing this on an audio excerpt, which includes some commentary on Elizabeth Warren's views from MSNBC, filtered through a report by Palisade Liberty Writers News.
Right. So we have this one source presenting sort of two sides, Warren's take and then another perspective reacting to it.
Exactly. So the goal for this deep dive really is to unpack those different explanations. What arguments were people making right after that election about why it happened?
Okay, let's start with Elizabeth Warren's perspective then, as it's laid out in our source material. The report says she was on MSNBC and said Trump's win was partly, at least, down to, what was the phrase? An ugly stew of racism.
Yeah, ugly stew of racism. It's definitely a memorable phrase. But it's important, I think, based on the source, to see she didn't just blame race.
No, right. She apparently also flagged other things driving voter anger, things that sound more maybe economic.
Like student loan debt, which is huge, lack of good jobs, people worried about retirement, that kind of insecurity.
Okay, so she acknowledged that real economic frustration was there.
She did. But her argument, or at least how it's reported here, is that Trump, well, he took that anger, that genuine frustration, and sort of redirected it.
Redirected it how?
By blaming other people. Pointing the finger at groups based on how they worship or how they look or their skin color, instead of maybe focusing on, say, systemic issues.
Okay. So tap into the real economic pain, but then provide a different target for the anger. Is that the idea?
That seems to be the core of it, yeah. She's quoted saying his story, the narrative he offered, was just the wrong story.
The wrong story for the right anger, maybe?
Perhaps. She sees the anger as valid, but his explanation, his narrative, as divisive. And then, of course, the audio shifts gears pretty dramatically.
Yeah, it really does. This other viewpoint comes in, and it strongly pushes back. It basically says, no, racism wasn't the main thing at all.
Not at all. In fact, it frames the win in almost opposite terms. It talks about things like wholesome patriotism and nationalism.
Wholesome patriotism. Okay. So this view sees Trump supporters quite differently, not motivated by racism, but by love of country.
That's the picture painted, yes.
Yes.
People who love this country and who are standing against what the source calls globalist masters.
Globalist masters. What does that usually refer to in these kinds of discussions? Is it about trade deals, international bodies?
Often, yeah. It can mean things like international organizations, trade deals like NAFTA, maybe. Anything seen as undermining national control or prioritizing global interests over American ones. This perspective really emphasizes putting America first.
And the audio links that directly to specific issues, right?
It does. Things like border security, prioritizing American citizens for jobs. Those are presented as the key drivers for voters.
So it's a total flip. Warren sees economic frustration channeled into racial resentment. This view sees, well, patriotism and nationalism focused on jobs and borders.
Exactly. And they explicitly say the election was about having a job, being able to pay your bills. They directly counter the idea that identity politics was the main issue for Trump voters.
Right. And they actually take aim at the Democrats on that front, don't they?
Oh, definitely. There's a strong critique here, saying the Democrats focus too much on identity politics and that they're too quick to call people racist.
Yeah, the audio suggests that that approach, focusing on identity and calling out racism, actually pushes voters away. That's a bad strategy.
And they even bring up, quite pointedly, Elizabeth Warren's own past controversy about her claims of Native American ancestry.
Ooh, yeah, that's definitely a jab. What's the point of bringing that up there, do you think, in the context of arguing about the election?
Well, it seems like an attempt to undermine her credibility on issues of identity, or to sort of say, look who's talking about division or identity politics. It questions her standing to make the argument she's making about Trump.
Okay, so stepping back, we've got these two really, really different narratives trying to explain the same event.
Absolutely. One narrative says, look, racial prejudice played a key role, maybe exploiting existing economic fears. The other says, no, it was about patriotism, nationalism, jobs, borders, and pushing back against globalism.
The disagreements are pretty fundamental. Was it mostly economics or mostly identity and prejudice, or how do they mix?
And how do we even define terms like patriotism or nationalism? Do they mean the same thing to everyone involved? That's a huge point of contention.
Plus, the whole question of identity politics, how much did it really drive votes versus these other economic or nationalistic concerns?
And tied into that is the perception of the Democrats. Were they alienating voters with their focus, as one side argues, or were they correctly identifying a dangerous trend, as the other perspective implies?
You've got one side seeing, I suppose, a manipulation of voters using racial division.
And the other side seeing a grassroots movement based on national pride and economic self-interest, maybe traditional values,
Yeah.
just completely different interpretations.
It really shows how complex decoding an election can be. So just to recap for everyone listening, we heard about Warren's view linking racism and economic anxiety with Trump supposedly redirecting that anger.
And then the counter-argument, emphasizing patriotism, nationalism, jobs, borders, and a rejection of globalist influences and identity politics.
So thinking about these really divergent ways to understand 2016, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How do these same arguments, these same fault lines, maybe continue to shape politics today? Something to think about.
Definitely something to mull over.
Thanks for digging into this with us on The Deep Dive.